um, and should spotlight. Whoop! That's not what I meant to do. Sorry. Where am I? Where am I? I accidentally hit hide myself instead of unhide myself. Whoop! That's not what I meant to do. Does anybody know the solution to this issue? Video settings. Come on now. I've lost my thing. Do you guys know where unhide is?
What are you trying to do?
In the drop down where I spotlight myself,
Mm.
I hit the next thing down, which was hide myself.
I don't know about that one.
And now I can't.
Do you have your self pinned or something?
That's that's the drop down I usually use. So I
Uh,
usually use spotlight so that it fills up even if we have background stuff. Show self view. Aha! Found it. All right, and then spotlight. There. Haha. There we go. Okay. Thank you for your patience. I guess we are all still learning Zoom, even a year out. Okay, so welcome to week 12. And we're in the second to the last category for our class, which is eroticism. Ooh! I thought I had a cheesy moment before we started class today. I was thinking that I should get that old 1990s song, Let's Talk About Sex. But I resisted because that felt a little bit like a dad joke. Does it seem like a dad joke? Anyway, maybe a professor joke is the right way to say it. So we're going to talk about feminism today. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we understand are the separate waves of feminism, which are basically like what were the big goals of each wave of feminism. And also a little chat about burlesque and what it was and is, what it is and isn't. And then also talking about skirt dancing. I think we're doing more of that next week because when I perused, I didn't see a lot of links to can. So, but we'll talk about that a little bit in this category, and basically the power of sexuality and how we got to sexuality being both taboo and powerful. And we've talked about that in terms of. Are you laughing at me, Damien?
well, I'm just laughing at what you're talking about. It was just kind of funny.
Oh, it is funny. I was like,
Yeah.
so we're gonna have lots of like, I don't think they're awkward conversation because it's kind of my passion topic, but I encourage us to all take a look at that. What else? Let's start share screen. Do you guys have any questions beforehand? Oh, I had a I had a poll for this discussion, but it's not loaded. So I'm just going to ask you guys, since there's just a few of you, kind of going into this. Do you um, do you know anyone currently who is like a personal friend who is a stripper or a sex worker or a burlesque dancer? How's that for an awkward question? Anybody? Anybody? There's a maybe. So, we're going to talk about the difference between those things because I think it's really important to know the difference. And as a dancer, I have to tell you that throughout my life, but especially when I was in my 20s and I said I'm a dancer to some new person that I was just meeting, about half the time, no matter where we were, what kind of a fancy restaurant it was, what kind of a fancy party, how well I was dressed, if I said dancer and I wasn't on a school campus, some part of their brain thought stripper. So that's part of why it's so fascinating to talk about this style of dance. And I don't know if my old dance company is in the next week. We might take a peek at my old dance company because let me tell you, there were not long dresses from the ankles to the the chin. So I'm going to come at this conversation loving to do sexy jazz dance. Like that's my favorite kind of jazz dancing to do. All right, so let's look at some pictures. Oh, I got to share the screen or it's no fun for you guys, right? Okay, so please excuse the extra material here. These are screenshots that I haven't yet edited, but I'm glad Richard Powers is here showing because he is a Stanford professor who taught a class that I took this last spring about the history of social dancing. And he also is an archivist. So he goes and collects imagery, handbooks, dance manuals about social dancing from I guess as early as the 1500s. Most of his collection is later, but his class that I took spent a bunch of time in the first couple of weeks looking at the differences and the evolution of social dances. For example, from well, the pictures I'm going to show you today are sort of the transition at the end of the 1800s from the staid upright country dances in Europe and how from the influences from America and also just the dances they were already doing in Paris, how those dances changed into can-can as we know it and skirt dancing. So one of the things that I want to talk about socially that's going to connect together with Hamilton is that in Paris at this time, so we're talking like 1840s, was it that early? These outfits are a little bit more like 1840s, 50s, but certainly into the 1860s. 1860s is when we really have can-can. Sorry, I'm using the wrong tabs. Paris at the time was totally in a different ballpark in terms of some women's rights. And this is going to lead us into our discussion about the first wave of feminism. So first wave feminism is generally considered in to be in 1849 when a group of women got together and signed basically a Bill of Rights for women. And at this time, it was a multicultural event. Like Sojourner Truth was there and spoke at this meeting. But then, in order to get some rights passed, the white women of money basically abandoned the women of color. And this is a really important part of feminism's failings in the past, not only the first wave of feminism, but also the second wave of feminism and also the third wave of feminism. Now that we're in the fourth, we're kind of trying to do better, as in Black Trans Lives Matter. That would be fourth wave feminism. But I just want to like start out with that acknowledgement that we're going to talk about human rights, and in the politicization of the fight for human rights in terms of feminism, often the women of privilege have started out working with the women of color, and their rights were being abused at such different levels that even though the women of color had it way, way, way worse, in order to get a step forward, the women of privilege often used their privilege to get a small step forward and ended up abandoning the other folks. So, what does that mean? Let's find another cute picture here. So these are images that kind of express sort of the dichotomy of the social opinion about women at the time. So this is supposed to be a parody of a quote unquote modern woman who, you'll notice, I mean, it might not make sense to us even now what's going on here. She's wearing a man's home relaxing robe coat, smoking robe. She's smoking a cigar, which was not allowed to women except for the bad girls. And her husband is doing needlework and is like crushed under the weight of her leisure. Yeah. So that we're talking about like Victorian times here. And that's what people thought feminism was at this time. This is an image from a Parisian newspaper at this time. And it's supposed to be right outside. They had these basically dance hall, like nightclubs, right? That were called gardens. So there were dancing gardens in Paris. And outside of the dancing gardens, and this is supposed to be an image of outside of the door, there are women tantalizing with, this is a Cupid, so tantalizing with love, the men who are exiting the dance garden. And so they're taking their money, these are bags of money, and they're going to take advantage of them, these loose women. And this is an image of a woman dancing in a dance hall with a man. And you can see that her skirt is being lifted. She's showing inner thigh. This part of the body at this time in the 1800s, it was okay to show cleavage in a ball gown, but never legs. Legs were scandalous. And that's part of why skirt dancing is such a big deal at this time. So you can see this is the beginnings of can-can. So can-can, as we think of it now, is like a kick line with all the women standing in a row. But it started as a partner dance, which is kind of exciting. So you can see some elements from that. You can also see here, this is an image from one of the dance gardens. And when I say dance garden, if you've ever seen the Baz Luhrmann musical Moulin Rouge or the new Broadway musical Moulin Rouge, it's set in one of these Parisian dance gardens. And you can see that these women are smoking cigars and talking to strange men. So this one is also set on the day of Carnival. Have you guys ever heard of Carnival? It's huge, like everywhere except for America. So Carnival it's a short version. It's what we know as Fat Tuesday in New Orleans. It is the day of celebration before the fasting of Lent in Catholic religion. Please correct me if I am stating that incorrectly. And in Paris in particular, but all over Europe, the day of Carnival was an all rules are off opportunity. And that included the restrictions on women nice women from at least the 1400s in Western European culture and all the way through until First Wave, Second Wave Feminism, women were supposed to stay at home in a corset for most of that time and to take care of the children and the household and to not talk to strangers without the company of their husband unless it was like there's certain opportunities where it's okay, like church. You certainly weren't allowed to smoke. You weren't supposed to express your own opinions. People didn't want to educate women a lot of the time up until, gosh, when did that start to change? I mean, really that first meeting we're talking about in the 1840s, one of their arguments was that women needed to be educated because people did not educate women so that they wouldn't want to leave the household. They'd be totally engaged and immersed in their own small private world. And one of the terms that was used in the 1800s especially, and still 1900s, for this idea was separate spheres. So there was the masculine sphere of life and there was the feminine sphere of life. And on Carnival, you were allowed to break those rules. Women were allowed to go out dancing and be unchaperoned. And also upper and lower classes were allowed to mingle. And this was otherwise not allowed. So Carnival was a great big day. And basically in Paris, those garden dance halls were like a year-round carnival. Giant dance parties, mixing classes, women getting to sit around weird and be playful. So those are all images of dance halls. Yeah. And you can see, this is a great one because you can see sort of the difference between this woman's demeanor, the way she's proud, lifting her chest, her feet are dancing around. She's lifting her skirts up. At this time, an ankle was a highly sexualized part of the body because other women are keeping their skirts all the way down to the ground as close as possible. And also in these times, if you have a dress, yeah, if you have a dress like this dress might be your one and only dress. This is a party dress, so obviously that woman had more than one dress. But basically, you would have your underclothing and your corsetry, and then on top of it, you would have a day dress or a work dress, and you would wear that almost every day. And you would just wear your underclothing into the bath with you once a week and almost never take it off. This is how things were in Victorian life. And so it was really a sign of your class level and privilege to have as much fabric as possible and for it to be as long and voluminous as possible, because if you were a lady of wealth, then you would have a maid who would take care of your skirts, right? So you get them as much fabric as you can convince yourself to spend money on, and then you also are demonstrating that you have a worker to help keep those things clean. Let's have one more physical example here. Here we go. So we're not going to get rid of corsets until the 1920s, but since we're talking about sexualizing of the woman's body and dancing, here is a corset. It's a short corset, so it's not a modern corset, but you can kind of see here. Let me stop share so you can see this better. You can see here that there are these little braces, so it links together, yeah? And then there's a thick bone here. This one is wide. It's about 3/4 of an inch. This would have been made of whalebone at the time. And then you have these smaller bones, also would have been made of whalebone at the time. And since this is a modern corset, this is made from steel. So, goodness, when did the steel come in? Probably Victorian era. So this is what a sprung steel bone looks like inside of a corset. And can I pop this out? I wonder. I can. Cool. If we were in person, I would love to let you feel this. So this is actually steel. It's not aluminum, and it's a spring, but it's quite firm. And in a corset, you would often have 16 of these bones around you to shape the female form. The idea being twofold. One, to get as much contrast as possible. So historically speaking, corsets were not supposed to make you look skinny, which is sort of a modern ideal of what the female body is supposed to look like. It was supposed to make you look a certain proportion. So whether you were a large framed person or a small framed person, what you wanted was that hourglass shape. And it changed throughout times. It wasn't always exactly an hourglass, but like, let's make that generalization. The other thing that a corset does is that it supports your bosom, because we did not have bras until corsets came off. And I would say bras started probably 1920s, right, when the corsets came off. And so that's another reason why you had so much buy-in. Like a really comfortable corset, especially earlier in time, 1700s, is going to support the woman's chest, because it's very uncomfortable. If you are a gentleman and you don't know this, it's very uncomfortable for your chest to be bouncing around all day long. And you need them to feed your children. And we didn't have birth control until, we didn't have really effective birth control, I should say. We're going to talk about that too, till 1959. So that means a woman's chest is going to be engorged and painful and at use at all times. So you needed, because everybody was a mom if you were married, pretty much, you needed support for that. So corset in the 1700s is still going to be quite firm, but it might not have had boning because whalebone didn't come easily, but it would still hold the woman in, support her back. But women would work in these things if you think about like Renaissance fair bodices. But by the time we get to the Victorian era, because of this fashion to have as much fabric as possible on the body, if you have all those skirts, it's really super heavy. And so the steel bone corset also supports the weight of your costume and your, well, costume, right? Your dress is showing off wealth, power, and privilege. And the stronger the corset, the more fabric it can hold up. And also then you get that restriction of the waist and restriction of movement, because remember we talked about that Western Eurocentric squeezing in and control, and that control was what showed off power, as opposed to a fluid, I can handle all of my emotions approach, which is one of the Africanist elements, the aesthetic of cool, right? So I know that seems like a lot, but that gives you sort of a starting point for where we began in 1849. Women had no right to vote. Neither did slaves, right? Everything I'm going to say, you can put neither did slaves at the end of that sentence. Please do, because it's important to see it in the broader context. But for the sake, no right to vote. They were essentially owned by their husbands, and they were often married off in their teens. So when we think about modern day quinceañeras and all those white dresses that we see young women when they turn sweet 16, sweet 16 traditions come from your family showing you off as eligible for marriage in the Western Eurocentric system. So you put that daughter in a white dress, hello, wedding gown, and you show her off in public so that she is eligible to be married at age 16, right? Not, if you think about your mental state at 16 versus now as a college student, it's a bit of a difference. So these women were being married off before even having the emotional maturity that you guys have right now. When women were married, certainly in England and in America, it was legally acceptable for a man to beat his wife. It was expected that the woman be sexually available for her husband at any point in time because her job was to procreate. The woman did not have any rights or choice or even very much ability to choose when she got pregnant, whether she carried a child to term, how many children she had. All of those choices were the purview of her husband. In many cases, when a woman's husband died, let's say, of natural cause, let's say they had a beautiful, happy family and marriage and they were living in a little house and everything was magical cottage core, and the husband dies of diphtheria, the woman can't go have a job. She can only do sewing or helping to raise children or maybe midwifery. We're going to talk about that. But in general, she can't earn an income. And if she could go and do a job, she would only be paid a small percentage of what the man was supposed to be paid for doing the same work. And I'm talking small, like 25%, because it was assumed that every woman would have a husband who was supposed to be really bringing home the bacon. Furthermore, I wish I had the exact date in my mind, but I don't, please forgive me. Many of the laws about women's ability to own property stipulated that a woman couldn't own property, so that if a woman were living in a house with her children and her husband died, she would lose that house to her husband's next male relative. So let's imagine that you have no male children. That means that you and all of your children at the point of your husband's death are now living in a house that belongs to his second cousin on the grumpy side. So all of these issues were first wave feminism's issues. Like, women wanted the right to own property so that they wouldn't be homeless if something happened to their husband. They would have liked to work, but that didn't come until later. They wanted some control over how many children they had. And at this stage, all that really meant is, could it please be taken off the books that it's legal for my husband to rape and beat me? That's first wave feminism. Big deal. And one of the reasons that France was so far ahead of the rest of Western civilization for first wave feminism is because they just had the French Revolution. And it was just Halloween, so I'm sure you've all heard of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the book about the monster that's created by the Dr. Frankenstein and how it all goes wrong. Mary Shelley wrote that book really to make a point about birth control. Because what happens in that book is that the man has purview over the creation of life, and it goes wrong because he doesn't have any empathy for and he doesn't think about the monster's feelings or being a healthy being, right? He can't create something in the way that stereotypically a mother at the time, right? Because it's a sexist fight. But this was still a modern consideration. And the reason why Mary Shelley was so interested in these gender and reproductive questions is because her mother, I'm blanking on her mother's name, it'll come back, Mary Wollstonecraft, wrote one of the first feminist books and writings that there was. Mary Wollstonecraft was an English woman who moved to France post and during revolution and like helped fight in the French Revolution, which was really like a people's uprising against the upper classes. And in the process of that, because so many women were involved in the fighting and sabotage, that there were different rights for women after the French Revolution. And then Mary Wollstonecraft came back, continued to live out of wedlock because she refused to get married to any man, and wrote this great work about how women should have the right to decide whether or not they get pregnant and not be raped and not have their property stolen from them when they got married. Because that was another thing. If you did own property, when you got married, it wasn't yours anymore. It was your husband's. So that's first wave feminism. Let's move it on to second wave feminism. Wait, before I go there, right to vote. Does anybody remember when women got the right to vote in America? Let's have a real question. Can you chat me a guess? What year did women get the right to vote in America? Yay. Wrong answers are welcome. Those are pretty good guesses, actually. I believe it's 1918. Do you guys remember Mary Poppins? Yes? The children's mother is a suffragette. So she is a first wave feminist who is going out to fight for the right to vote in England. English women got the right to vote before us. Her mom is still wearing corsets in that movie. How far above? Was it 19? I'm not sure. I don't know when it was in England. That's a good question. How about in Japan? Do you know what the answer is in Japan?
I'm sorry.
Do you know what year women got the right to vote in Japan? I mean, maybe they always had it.
I don't know, but I thought it's too late in US because it's pretty new, right?
Pretty late. I don't know. I'm curious. Please find out. I'd love to know.
Yeah. Okay.
So that first wave of feminism was asking for the right to vote for women. When the group broke apart on class lines, many of the women, well, I suppose this is true of everybody involved. Most of that energy from 1849 dissipated because America became focused on ending slavery. So a lot of those activists in 1849 who were working for women's rights shifted gears and became the abolitionists who helped America move on from slavery shortly thereafter. And this is part of why Black men and slaves became enslaved first. That's much more important, right? But that's part of why when we have that awkward like shift from that horrible 3/5 of a man law issue, ooh, burn. That's the year my mom was born. That's why Black men got the right to vote before women in America, is because we had to do abolition first in this country. So women in America finally got the right to vote in, I believe it's 1918. And then we have the jazz age happening, right? It's a very freeing time. Women are taking off their corsets finally and dancing, and the movements of the dance change from those stayed upright positions to the movements that we see in our jazz dance and Lindy Hop, where women are bending and twisting. And I'm trying to get us up to second wave feminism. Let's share screen. I did pop something up here. Go here. Bonk, bonk, bonk. There. All right. Can I close this for you guys? There we go. Okay. So, second wave feminism. All right, this is what we were just talking about. 1848 to 1920, first wave. Right to vote, right to own property, right to be seen as a human being. Seneca Falls Convention of 1848. This is your reading for this week, so you can find all of this in the regular link. There's Sojourner Truth, speaking in first wave feminism. Black men get the right to vote in 1870, and then women. All right, so second wave, 1963 to 1980s. So again, we have the same issue with the women of privilege starting working with the women of color and it falling apart. And so the second wave feminism started out wanting more working freedom, but like that's gonna already cause a problem, right? If you are a woman of privilege, you want the right to work a job and not just be a stay-at-home mom. But if you're a woman of color, you already have to work because your family doesn't have enough money and be a full-time mom. So that was one of the ways in which the second wave feminism fell apart and didn't hold together the two groups, the privileged women and the women of color in America. But what is most important to think about second wave feminism is, first of all, this book, The Feminine Mystique. And I always think of it most importantly because in 1959, we have the invention of the birth control pill. So, birth control pill was originally created for other purposes. It might have been cancer related that it was invented for, but they realized that taking the birth control pill allowed your body to not get pregnant. But when it was invented, doctors would sometimes prescribe it, having had a private conversation with women, but initially it was quite illegal. All contraception during first wave feminism time was illegal, so women would have to like find a secret doctor who would prescribe them something like a diaphragm that they would secretly put in so that they didn't get pregnant while they were sleeping with their husbands, if their husbands didn't approve. And then by the time you get to 1959, birth control pill is approved for use as birth control, and women can just go to their doctor and get it. And so people started, because of this book, The Feminine Mystique, which women of privilege were book clubbing the heck out of in the early 60s, people started to change their way of thinking about women and sexuality in terms of that a woman might want to have sex for her own reasons, as opposed to just to use it as a tool of power for men. This was not common thought. That a woman might want to go out and work, that staying at home in this privileged place was maybe not what every woman wanted. All waves of feminism are pro-education. The second wave feminism also really focused on the gender pay gap. And then in 1973, we have the other thing that is really important to think about in second wave feminism, which is Roe v. Wade. So without going too far down that path, do you guys know what the legal argument about Roe v. Wade is? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, so Roe v. Wade is a legal Supreme Court argument that happened in the United States of America in 1973 that essentially legalized abortion for women. And the important part about understanding why Roe v. Wade has remained an essentially an inarguable right to right now so far, because they keep trying to break it, is because it argues that the act of carrying a child for 9 months and delivering a child is physically I wish I knew the exact words that were used. I should look this up for next time. That it's physically difficult for women, go figure, to have your body ripped apart from your most delicate parts and to spend 9 months carrying a child. Now, we are very politicized about the idea of abortion in America. It makes people really upset because they argue for the rights of the unborn child. So there are often debates in America about when a child becomes a human being, when when it goes from like an egg cell and a sperm cell and then becomes a zygote and eventually becomes a fetus. At what point is it a human being as opposed to something that's not quite human? What point does it get human rights? There's lots of information and misinformation about what a fetus or a zygote looks like and is capable of in this country, even though that should be science. It's a thing that like people protest about. And all of this strangely comes back to our perception of women and their place in the world. Because before Roe v. Wade and before the religious right in America started arguing about abortion, conservative Republicans were pro-abortion and pro-birth control. I know this is going to be hard for those of you who are American to wrap your head around, because it was a way to keep the lower class people of color from over reproducing. Just let that sink in, because that's eugenics right there, right? That is like a form of genocide. So people initially on the conservative right would push for more abortions. And so this is another reason, like, point of strife within the feminist argument, is that women of color were trying to get abortions, or I'm sorry, women of privilege were trying to get abortions, but women of color were sometimes given them without choice. And that is like a whole nother tangent that we could go on, because it happened and continued to happen all the way into the 2000s in this country in women's jails. Like, women would go in for a cancer check and like have a hysterectomy done to them. Sometimes even when pregnant. Like, it's really distressing. But let's pull back. Okay, let's pull back to fun times. Does that give you a sense of second wave feminism? Women wanted to work and not have to give birth. Second wave feminism. Third wave feminism is from the 1980s-ish on, and we're now sort of considering that we're in fourth wave feminism. So third wave feminism is really about women's choice in defining gender roles and sexuality and sexual freedom. So after the 1960s, right? Free love, we have birth control, we can have consensual sex. 1970s, people are getting kind of burned out on drugs and like tired and getting back to work. There's a recession. 1980s, we have an economic boom, and there's a really this hardcore like reoppression of society culturally, where you have like the yuppies. If you think about like any 1980s movies, it's always like the rich white kids are the bad guys, and everybody has to fall in line and dress like everybody else, and you got to be popular. That social pressure was also happening in terms of feminism, right? Like it was both good and bad to be sexual in the 1980s. And that is the same thing we've had all the time, right? Because on one hand, you have power as a woman of privilege if you stay home and you only sleep with your husband and you are his sexual property. But if you break those rules, you're ousted by society, but you also have the freedom to speak your mind and, I don't know, choose a sexual partner and maybe make money off of that or not. So let's look at something fun. Okay. Burlesque originally. Oh, sorry, I didn't take you with me. Share screen. Burlesque. This is a theatrical reenactment of vaudeville, which was called music hall in England. So usually musical theater is going on here, but not a connected storyline throughout the whole night. Lots of puns. And they're going to do a pretty modern idea, but a version of can-can here, yes? Which came from Paris, where women were allowed to be free in the dance halls. Yeah? So these two performers, this is from the Dickens Fair a number of years ago. This woman on our right used to actually work for a while as a Vegas showgirl. So when we talk about the positioning of women's bodies in these showgirl things, which we'll do in our Try It Out next week, that's who I learned it from. And this woman here works a lot of the time for Disney and theme parks. So they're not supposed to talk about what character they are, but she's Mary Poppins. Awesome, awesome, awesome people. So here is Le Can-Can Bijou. So they are a historical reenactment of can-can. And you can see the stereotypical ruffled underdresses, stockings that go up to the thighs, and actually these, where are those other unders? The long underwear that this woman is wearing are more appropriate. So I'm telling you this because we're talking about the power of sexuality here, yes? Can-can sometimes was rumored that when a woman did can-can, she would lift her skirt up and you could see the whole Monty, because those long underwear were not sewn together at the bottom. They just like layered and you tied them at the waist. So they're basically like, you know, those Red Kids jammies where the butt is free so that you can go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And that was true of those underwear that were worn by the women doing can-can. So here is, this is also obviously not actually from the 1890s. This is from a BBC show about the owner of a giant department store, but this is his mistress performing a burlesque number from the 1890s. And what doesn't seem obvious to us currently is that they're wearing men's pajamas, which is a suggestion that she's sleeping with a man, although because it's burlesque in the 1890s, she's not actually showing herself sleeping with a man. Instead, she's just dancing with women and pretending to have a slumber party. So a lot of the sexuality at this time in the 1800s was implied, right? If you're wearing men's pajamas, it's because you stole them from your man. But you can also see some of those signifiers of jazz dance entering that. So this is also a modern take on old school burlesque, but it is one that is true, is like dear to my heart. So this is Madeline Kahn performing in the Mel Brooks movie Blazing Saddles, and she's basically making fun of burlesque, right? Right? The outfit of the corset and the thigh highs, the dance movement that is based mostly on walking and undressing. I mean, we could watch this forever, but it is in your list, so you can find it yourself. What else do I want to cover here? Let's go to your pages. So we have from that burlesque element, these are the links to the things we just saw. What used to be plays on words and cover like revealing outfits, and this conundrum of when you started to make those sexual implications that you are cast out from society, from polite society, right? You can now only be a mistress and you can't be a marriageable virgin wife for the most part. This class difference becomes powerful because just as much as women wanted to have freedom, men were attracted by women who were independent, strong, sexually empowered, and always have been. Right? Because, you know, it's nice to be talking to someone who can have a conversation with you that's not just about your children. So that dance form evolved from skirt dances, where a lot of the time those women, being unmarriageable, were also sex workers. And those elements of can-can, those elements of music hall, still inform how we dress sexuality in third wave feminism and beyond. So third wave feminism was this big argument about whether women were betraying feminism by dressing sexy, right? Because they'd fought so hard to like not be objectified during second wave feminism. In third wave feminism, women are starting to say, I can wear lipstick and still be a feminist. I can still want to use this power and make these choices for myself. And like it's having your cake and eating too. So this is Burlesque the movie, starring Christina Aguilera and Cher. And they're definitely absolutely doing jazz dance. Let's zoom in here for us. Famous Alan Cumming in the background there. Stanley Tucci. It's actually a pretty great cast. But it's interesting because most of this movie is not doing burlesque. It's doing jazz dance, right? This is Broadway jazz dance. Fosse inspired. You have the Fosse walks here going on. The booties and the pelvises are back because it's more modern. In Fosse, 1960s and 70s, he tilted the pelvises forward a lot more. And that it's also like influenced by hip hop, jazz funk, right? Because this is early 2000s. But it's 100% third wave feminism, right? Like we are women, we are empowered in our sexuality. And a lot of a question in here about the sexual availability of these women. Like, are they available to pay for sex or not is sort of one of the big moral questions that happens in this film. It's interesting to note, especially pre-Magic Mike, that you still have these women wearing basically just jewelry, and look how much clothing the male dancers are wearing. Right? There's a difference there. And that change is going to happen much closer to now. So let's pop out of this full screen, scooch on down. 1201. Okay, you guys choose. Circus or what happens happens when stripping becomes dancing? Heels dance. Both of these are heels dance. Which one do you want? Pop quiz. Choose our closer. We didn't talk about Hamilton yet. Hamilton next time, I promise. We're going to talk about Sally. Jason, option 1 or option 2? 1 or 2? 1. Okay. Option 1. So this is Cirque du Soleil, right? We saw them in the first weeks. This is their show Zumanity. It plays in Vegas, and it's all about sexuality. And basically this whole show is manipulating stereotypes, right? So what do we have? We have a bunch of men who are watching football. And she's trying to get their attention, right? Third wave feminism. I am embodying my own sexuality. Also, you'll notice, though, that the men are not wearing a ton of clothes. This is much more modern. This is probably also early 2000s, and it was quite scandalous how, not quite scandalous, but it was not common for there to be so much male bisexuality and homosexuality as there is in this show. There's also trans people and cross-dressing, kind of like all the bases are covered in Zumanity. We also have here the classic cabaret chair. So when we watch Fosse, I think next week or the week after, we're going to talk about this cabaret chair and how it represents sexuality and sex work in so much of what we now consider sexy, that like this chair shape is a sexual thing. So I'm going to pop us out of here. This is one of the links in your reading, so you guys can find it and watch the rest of it. I love it. So what I want us to keep talking about in general as we go through feminism is when we're looking at jazz dance, Josephine Baker, 1920s, how is she using the culture's expectation of what sexuality should look like and what a woman should be doing? And in Josephine Baker's example, what should a Black woman be doing or not doing? How do these dances very consciously point out and manipulate those expectations in order to be more powerful? And a lot of the time that reads as I'm doing something sexy or scandalous or taboo, because we've made sexuality taboo because of our social history of a woman's fertility being something that was owned, right? For hundreds of years, right? Because of lineage and property rules. And that's pretty much the case worldwide. So that shaping, that cultural shaping and social shaping of the power of sexuality, making it taboo, has made it monetizable and a way to wield power in sexual dancing. So when we're going to talk about Josephine Baker, we're going to look at what are the blackface stereotypes that she's flipping on their head. Remember, we talk about the Whitman sisters and how they would like mess with their audiences by both being intelligent mammy stereotypes and then also like playful, appearing, like passing as white, upstanding citizens in the same show. A lot of what I consider to be high art, even when it's intensely sexual, is taking those same ideas and playing with them at the same time, right? There's definitely going to be like your Betty Page, classic burlesque. Is her dancing choreographed? Is it particularly skillful? But she's classic because she's at least playing with the stereotype of a good housewife gone bad. And so when we can sort of identify those tools and relate them to the social structure, that is what we're going to look at over the next couple of weeks. And so coming up next, in-depth Josephine Baker, Sally in Hamilton. Do you guys know who Sally was? I think I have it loaded so I can just give you a little peek. We'll discuss next time, but just to tantalize you, right? Here's Sally. Isn't she cute? Oh, she's so cute with her little jazz line and her high kicks. Yeah, we're going to talk all about that historical figure who just gets whitewashed out in there. Actually, I guess she's not being whitewashed. She's being... There's a word for it. In any case, Sally, gender in Hamilton, Josephine Baker, world's first superstar. And then I think Fosse is the other giant topic we'll cover in the next couple of weeks. Do you have any questions? That's a lot, right? If you were going to study today and kind of just take a make sure you understand, like heads up final exam, you're going to need to know those different waves of feminism. So drop back into that article that I peeked at, which is in your this week's reading, the Grady article, and make sure you know the difference between the three, because there's quite a few questions about that coming up. Okay? Yay! Thanks, guys. Fun as always.